quick. Thanks, May. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Just a quick check to make sure.
Loud and clear. Yep.
All right, perfect. So welcome everybody to the Zoe quarterly webinar, update webinar for October. And happy birthday to us. We actually launched this series last October and we're still going strong. We're hosting them once per calendar quarter and going well. Before we officially start though, I want to make everybody aware of a few housekeeping items. Attendee microphones are muted. Panelist microphones are not muted. So panelists, if you're not speaking, please remember to stay on mute. The webinar will be recorded and will be available at the end of the week on the OMP YouTube channel. We'll make that link available at zoe.org as well. Please use the Q&A options if you have a question at any point throughout the webinar. We have a lot of material here. It's highly unlikely that we'll get to open Q&A, so please do go ahead and type in your question when it comes to mind. And I think that does it. So I'm Rose Sakatch, Zoe Onboarding Squad Lead. I'll be kicking us off and wrapping us up as usual. And to start, let's talk a little bit about what we're planning for today. So we will just quickly review the goals of these quarterly update webinars. Then I'll turn it over to Peter to give us a ZAC update, Zoe Advisory Council update. And then he'll also provide us with an overview of what's coming with Zoe version 2. After that, we'll transition to each of the squad leads who will share with all of us the expected changes to the various core Zoe components as it pertains to V2. And they'll also outline some of the changes that will be coming as a result of V2 to the associated V2 conformance program. And then finally, we'll wrap it up as we always do with recent and upcoming events and some items that we feel are important or could be important to all of you in the community. So with that, again, we'll just go over some brief goals of this quarterly update. It's generally, we want to keep it as a forum for information exchange. We're doing it every quarter. We'll continue to do that into the new year. We generally have a focus topic and a focus Zoe squad. This time it's a little different. We're going to focus everything on V2 and invite all of the squad leads to share their background on V2. And then we usually wrap it up with upcoming events. And hopefully we'll get better at offering you an opportunity to provide us with some feedback. Again, please use the Q&A if you have any questions. With that, I will transfer over to Peter to talk about ZAC and V2.
All right, thank you, Rose. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the ZAC, starting with an introduction. And this is the same introduction we gave at the PI planning for last quarter. So for those who are hearing this the second time, I apologize, but it will be brief. Then I'll talk about some very recent changes inside the ZAC, talk about our first accomplishment as the ZAC, and then give you the ZAC's perspective on behalf of the enterprise customer of Zoe V2, and then talk a bit about our focus for the coming 2 quarters. Slide, please. So the ZAC is the Zoe Advisory Council, and it replaces the Zoe Leadership Council that used to exist. And it was formed, the ZAC was formed shortly after the formation of the TSC. And the best way to describe the roles of the ZAC and the TSC as they relate to each other is you can think of the TSC as the head of Zoe Engineering and the ZAC as the head of Zoe Product Management. But there's an important third point here, which is the TSC is in charge. So a little bit more on that is that whereas the TSC has a charter, it has a mandate, the ZAC is strictly an informal body. We have no charter, but we do have a role, and it is a formal role and done with rigor. So I'll get into that a little bit in the next slide on the details. Next slide, please. So the role of the ZAC, as I said before, we view ourselves sort of as the product management arm of the Zowe community, except we affect change and we have a role really through influence and assistance. But again, it's not a mandate per se. We have no power per se, except the power of our voices. And how people heed us and listen to us. So we've gotten off to a great start. We have a great relationship with the TSC. We are in their meetings. They are in our meetings. The ZAC right now is primarily made up of product managers for the respective companies that were the original representatives within the ZLC. However, we are hoping that will change. We want to invite other vendors into the ZAC. We want especially to have some enterprise customers represented in the ZAC. We're open to anyone to join and participate. We debate and consolidate the needs and the wishes of the stakeholders. However, the TSC will, of course, be on the implementing side of that. And we also serve as sort of communicators. So we have a role in communicating to the outside world, to enterprise customers, at events, things like that, what's going on within the Zowe community, where the Zowe project is going, things like that. And we also have a voice of interest in terms of incubators, the formation of new incubators and the promotion of incubators. Again, we don't hold the authority of making the decision, but we voice our opinion, and that's backed by our relationships with our enterprise customers. As far as the specifics, the nitty-gritty of how the ZAC operates, we have a standing meeting every Tuesday at 9 a.m. It is in the Open Mainframe project calendar. The link is there if you want to join us. And we track all of our information in GitHub. So the meeting minutes for each meeting, as well as agenda for the next meeting is always posted out in the open for anyone to see. So again, it's all out in the open and transparent, and welcome to anybody to join. Next slide, please. So in terms of changes since we last talked to a large audience about the ZAC, we now have a rotating chair. So the rotating chair, it changes once per quarter. Bruce Armstrong was the chair of the ZLC and was, I guess, the acting chair of the ZAC for the first few months. But now that's me up until the end of this quarter, Q4, I'll be the acting chair. And then hopefully somebody else will step up to the plate and take over the role for Q1 and so on. Anybody can be chair, not just the initial contributors, Broadcom, IBM, and Rocket. Selection is by ZAC consensus, but mostly it's who we can get to volunteer. So the role of the chair is representing the ZAC. So it's me presenting this presentation today to you. And in such a presentation next quarter, it would be somebody else, whoever takes that chair role. I host the weekly meeting. I am in charge of the agenda, and I produce the weekly minutes. That's the only new development within the ZAC in terms of our organization. Next slide, please. And our accomplishments. So we are very happy to see the publication and the implementation of the new Zoe Support Provider Conformance Program. So many, many months in the making. I think the next conformance program we create will probably take less time to stand up. We definitely learned from the process, but it is up and running. The link is there if you want to check it out. And Rose has an excellent blog post on the new program. The link is provided there as well. This provider conformance program will provide our customers in business critical environments with the confidence they need to know that they can rely on Zoe in production. Badges can be obtained for individual Zoe components. So a vendor may be able to only provide support for the CLI, for example, and they can get a badge just for CLI support. Or just for the virtual desktop support, or they can get a comprehensive support badge, which means that they can support all of the Zoe core components. And on the day of publication and implementation of this conformance program, we had day one badges, comprehensive support badges, both by Broadcom and IBM. Next slide, please. So V2. So this is the perspective of the enterprise customer in terms of the needs of the enterprise customer that are driving the V2 changes. So as a systems programmer, I need an easy user experience for standing up a Zoe and then over time for maintaining it and updating it. This has been a challenge for some of the Zoe customers, especially those that are new to USS. Unix System Services is such an important component platform for deploying the ZOS parts of Zoe. That has been a challenge at times, and also of prereqs of Zoe exploiting products other than Zoe itself. And so just in general, up and running is still a challenge, and the customers still want it to be simpler yet. I know we've made a lot of progress. It's a lot better than it was a couple of years ago, but it still needs to get better, and so that's still a major hill that our enterprise customers want to see climbed. Also, as an enterprise customer, I need high availability and fault tolerance. We're starting to see enterprise customers put Zoe exploiting products into production, and so when that happens, they really need it to be high availability, fault tolerance. So that's still a hill. I think we'll be in a good position though, based on what I'm seeing from the TSC and from the squads there. And also a training program. So this is probably what you'll see in 2022 is yet another conformance program to train people on Zoe. And that's what that's about. Also, there is talk of, wouldn't it be nice to integrate with ChatOps and NPS systems as an enterprise customer? Customer satisfaction ratings is always very important with customer-centric philosophies, ubiquitous among enterprise customers. And as a Zoe developer, making sure that we're able to use the latest versions of the various tools and languages is another important requirement. Next slide, please. And then from the, that's actually, I meant to delete this slide, I think, because this is really was meant to start to get into the details from a developer experience, from the developer perspective. But I didn't really want to go into that because that's going to be covered by the squads themselves. So I think I'd like to skip this one and let you guys speak to the details when you get there. Next slide, please. And so our focus for the next couple of quarters. So we very much want to onboard new members into the ZAC. We're hoping to get an enterprise client and some consumers. We want to talk about V2 and what it means for enterprise customers. We're looking at doing that at Share and at other events around the time of the V2 introduction. We want to continue to focus on up and running. We also want to continue to focus on containerization. There's still a lot of work to be done there. Although nobody seems ready to do it today, we know it's coming. Containerization definitely is a need. So we got to get there. As I mentioned before, NPS and chat ops are initiatives for 2022. A new training program so that we can get more people trained up on Zoe and make sure they're trained correctly. And then finally, integration with open source projects, other open source projects and open source code. And this has also been talk of app store concepts. And so that has a tie in also to the up and running. So that'll be another initiative for the next 2 quarters. I think, is there another slide, Rose?
Nope. I think that sums it up. All right. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so we're going to transition over to the various squad leads to talk about the impact of V2 on each of the Zoe core components, and we'll launch it with Michael Bauer and Zoe CLI.
All right, thank you, Rose. Before I jump into the exciting new features offered in the next release of Zoe CLI, I want to first just cover the Zoe release schedule and timeline. So Zoe is released on a regular schedule. The schedule here is shown on the release timeline in the bottom right corner of the screen. Zoe provides 3 different types of releases. The first is active. This is what Zoe V1 is currently in. This release receives updates regularly according to the schedule. It will later transition into a maintenance release where it will only receive security patches and fixes for critical bugs. And there's also a technical preview, which I'll touch more on lately, or more on in a moment. It accepts breaking changes, and it's where you can try out the latest and greatest features that will be part of the next major Zoe release. Every major version will be in the active phase for 2 years and then transition into the maintenance phase for another 2.5 years. This allows for a variety of adoption schedules. You could stay in the active releases and go from V1 to V2 to V3. It allows you to stay on the maintenance releases and go from V1 to V2 to V3. It also allows you to live on a release for the entire lifespan, being 4.5 years in V1, and then transition to Zoe V3. Each release comes with a conformance rollout, and each conformance program is tied to a specific component. So for example, at the top of this slide, we see badges for the API Mediation Layer, App Framework, and CLI, all related to Zoe V1. There's also now Zoe Explore conformance criteria for V1. So if you are building a VS Code extension, I encourage you to look into that. But they're all tied to a component and a version. So we plan to release Zoe V2 in late February of 2022. And today we are announcing that a new conformance program will be rolled out alongside V2, and we encourage all of our extenders to apply. Next slide, Rose. Okay, now I get to talk about the exciting candidates we have and new features we have in our technical preview of the Zoe CLI. So what you can expect in the V2 release is a simplified out-of-the-box experience for Zoe client technologies. So the first, simplified configuration, this will allow one person in your organization to configure Zoe client technologies and then roll this file out across the organization, across teams, so that each user doesn't need to set up their own profiles. We also look to improve it for that one person creating that file, for that admin or that team lead, through automatic creation for all API ML enabled services. So if your site is leveraging the API mediation layer, you have services configured with a single Zowe command, it can automatically generate your client configuration, allowing you to just get started with Zowe CLI and Zoe Explorer. Consistent and simplified login experience across configurations. This means that you'll be able to just start running CLI commands once you've imported this configuration file. You won't need to do any sort of separate login command up front. You can, but the CLI has the intelligence built into it to prompt you for the information and then use the correct underlying login mechanism, whether you're logging in direct to a service using username and password, logging into the API mediation layer and accessing services leveraging a JOT token, or even if you're using X509 certificates, the configuration information contained in that config file will dictate that. We also plan to offer a profile migration utility, which will enable users who have existing profiles on their machine to easily transition to the simplified configuration. And a very popular feature that's been tried out by multiple organizations is daemon mode. It greatly improves Zoe CLI response times. So if your Zoe CLI response time today is a little less than desired in your particular environment, I encourage you to try out that feature. We will also be moving some of our SDKs into LTS, whereas today they're more listed as in development. And I've already seen some organizations taking advantage of these SDKs and building applications on top of them. So I encourage you to check that out, or even if you just want to leverage them in your scripting, possibly using it as part of your test automation initiatives. And finally, we have a feature to transition the secure credential store plugin into core. This should improve the out-of-the-box experience because no separate plugin installation will be required. The secure credential store feature will be part of core, and it also improves the security as this will be the default experience. Next slide, Rose. So if you're interested in getting started with the Zowe V2 technical preview and providing feedback today, you can simply navigate to zoe.org/download, find the Zowe V2 LTS preview section, and click the Zoe vNext CLI core, install that, and get started right away. You can also click the review early access features to obtain documentation about the latest and greatest features that we're looking for feedback on, or check out medium.com/Zoe and some of the blogs listed here that detail these improvements. So for example, Zoe CLI getting started made easy details the improvements made to the configuration and rollout experience, allowing you to create a configuration file once, share that across an organization. Zoe CLI, a faster experience by Dan Koloski, details how to get started with daemon mode and improve the response times for the Zoe CLI. And automatic Zoe CLI service configuration using API Mediation Layer by Fernando details how if you have services that are flowing through the API Mediation Layer, you can run a command to automatically generate that configuration file. So to achieve this across the entire Zoe ecosystem, we do have some required updates for Conformance CLI plugins. For profile management, we're requiring specific syntax of certain commands, such as base path. Base path just represents the path that you access a service through the API mediation layer. We need to standardize on this name for a couple of reasons. One, so that when we do the auto init, when we populate these base path values, there's no inconsistency with those. And also just from a user experience perspective, when folks are creating the config, everything's named the same. This is similar for host, port, user, password, reject unauthorized option names. For example, we want folks leveraging host instead of host name. Also in the configuration now, there's ability to share properties amongst profiles. So for example, if you're accessing 20 services on one host, you don't need to put the host property for each profile. You can list it once and share it amongst all of those services. Tagging requirements, we're looking to standardize on how things are tagged on the public registry. So for example, we tag things as Zoe-VX-LTS, where the X represents the version number of Zoe. So for example, I see CLI users on the call. If you've installed it from the registry, you do an install at Zoe/CLI at Zowe V1 LTS. When we release V2, we'll have a V2 LTS tag and so on. The latest tag is to point to the most recent LTS version. So when we release V2 LTS, latest will also point to that. And next points to our technical preview section version so that folks can give us feedback. Web help display of CLI command groups. This is a new initiative. Currently, we host web help for the core Zoe CLI commands on zoe.org, and we've been asked to expand that to include the broader ecosystem of CLI plugins. We will be creating a GitHub repository and encouraging folks as a best practice to contribute their web help to that repository so that those interested in Zoe can easily see the commands offered by the various plugins. CLI command restrictions. I've covered this a little bit with the profile management naming requirements. There are further naming requirements as well, not to use special characters like the hashtag or pound symbol in your commands. And finally, daemon mode. We encourage folks to try out their plugins with daemon mode enabled. We haven't experienced any issues with that, but if you run into anything, please let us know as you're validating. And I think that wraps up the CLI squad. So I'll turn it over to Elliot to detail what's new with the API Mediation Layer.
Thanks, Mike. That was that's a really impressive list of new features. I think that's going to make a significant improvement to the user experience for those of us who are CLI users. So looking good. So my name's Elliot Jolly. I'm the squad lead for the Zowe API Mediation Layer. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the changes with going into V2 with regard to the mediation layer. So starting with the first feature that you can see up there, the service ID position change in the path pattern. So I'm going to actually talk about this in a bit more detail in the next slide, but essentially this is just about the position of the service ID in the path pattern. So I'll give you an example of that in the next slide. The second thing I just wanted to mention is the change in the UI framework for the API catalog. So currently we're using a framework which isn't actively developed. So we'd like to transition to a new, let's say, more sort of more actively developed and supported framework. And so we've chosen to move to Material. That's going to be something that will come out with version 2, and that's it's going to actually enable us to unlock some of our other redesign plans for the API catalog throughout the V2 lifecycle. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is regarding extensions to the API mediation layer. So if you wanted to extend on the functionality of the mediation layer, at the moment, via a plugin, for example, at the moment, I think you'd need, a sort of significant consultation with the squad in order to be able to do that. And so what we want to do is, we want to actually sort of document a standardized mechanism for extending the mediation layer. and that will include a sample extension as well. So I mean, the squad will still be available, obviously, to guide anyone through that development, but at least we'll have some hopefully concise and coherent documentation plus the sample to help folks do that. So this next slide pertains to some of the changes that will be going into the conformance criteria with regard to APIs, the mediation layer for version 2. The first one I want to talk about is the service ID position change. That I touched on that in the previous slide. So currently service ID in version 1, it's supported in both the first and the last position in the path. And then from V2, what we're doing is we're asking that it's only in, it should only be in the first place in the path. So if you look at the example that I've got there for CA Endeavor, you can see how that service ID, CA Endeavor, has actually moved from the last position, if you like, to the first position. So that's what we're going to be asking for V2, and the reason we're doing that is we just like to have a standard path for services that are both running through the mediation layer, but also standalone outside of the mediation layer. So it'd just be easier to move that service across if you ever need to. And just generally, it's just easier for us to communicate if we just have that one standard position for the service ID. It's just easier for for folks to understand what the expectations are, and it's just easier for us to support from a squad perspective. And given that we support both positions currently in V1, some of you may already be conformant here if you do have service ID in that first position. The second bullet point there, services must provide API ID. So the API ID parameter specifies the API identifier that's registered in the mediation layer installation. So it's a kind of a unique identifier for the type of API in the mediation layer. So essentially what we're asking is that this is correctly set by your service. And the reason for that is that it's a critical part of the new automated client CLI configuration that Mike had touched on earlier. So that's a great new feature, and in order to leverage that, you do need to make sure that you have this API ID configured, correctly set. And then the final change that's going into the conformance criteria at this time for V2 is actually more something for the Broadcom folks. We ask that each service has a service each service ID has a prefix. So in the case of Broadcom services, that until now has been CA. But Broadcom is going through a rebranding, and so they are dropping the CA as a prefix. We don't yet have another prefix, but in the near future, and certainly for V2 conformance, we will indicate a new prefix to be used for Broadcom service owners that will no longer be CA. It'll be something else. Okay, Rose, I think that's it from a mediation layer perspective.
All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jesselyn Ponambayan. I'm the squad lead for the Explorers team. And I just want to show you the candidates for the V2 for Zoe Explorer. So as Mike mentioned earlier, that the V1 conformance program will be officially released soon. And I would like you to look out for that. But for V2 candidates, we would like to have this extensibility APIs and conformance rules. So we implemented a standardization of our menu items and command settings. So if you have an extension that extends Zoe Explorer today, you might be affected by this. It will be a breaking change. So I would like for you to check out our standard menu items and command settings. We also implemented templates. Through the Open Mainframe Mentorship Program, we are now providing templates for Zoe Explorer extenders. You can use that, and you will be conformant immediately when you use that template for your extension. Another candidate that we wanted for V2 is handling of the simplified configuration file, which includes the creation of the configuration file, the team configuration file that the CLI explained earlier, and also the securing of the credential through Zoe Explorer. So what it means is that you are able to create your team configuration file inside Zoe Explorer, and as well as secure your credentials through the extension. And the other features that we wanted to implement is the multi-select support for all applicable features of Zoe Explorer, and this will improve productivity for the extensions, and also removing of the link profile features. So this will be a refactoring for our extensions. Since the team configuration file and base profiles are implemented in our extensions, this link profile feature is no longer needed. Next slide, please. I guess that's all for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So now back to some server-side changes, starting with the WebUI squad, covering ZSS, the app server, and the desktop. A lot of these you'll see are trying to make things easier. So the first one is consolidation of the Web Explorer servers. What we're trying to do here is we've realized that we can get the same end user features with much less processes running on either ZOS or even in containers by taking the Explorer, the Web Explorer features, and putting them inside of the app server to be served to the browser. And rather than having a wrapper of ZOSMF in the form of a Java server, we could use the Java server, or we could use ZOSMF directly. So that first line item is really just about trimming our process count while retaining the same features. However, it is a breaking change because since where the code lives is being relocated, the URLs will change because they'll be originating from a different place. But otherwise, the feature should be the same there. Second item here is the desktop library upgrades. This is just something that we have to do every time that we go to a new major version. For maintainability and security, we need to be on the latest versions of things like Angular, Core.js, many other core libraries, because these old versions, they go out of support. So it becomes hard for Zoe to maintain them. So we plan to move from Angular 6 all the way to 12. And this should not affect iframe plugins at all. If you have a desktop plugin that's in an iframe, you can just ignore all of these library upgrades. They're not going to make a difference. But if you have a native plugin, particularly Angular, this might break your plugin. You might need to make some changes because some features that are in Angular 6 are not in Angular 12. However, we've been doing these changes to Zoe Core, and we haven't noticed too much that's breaking when moving from 6 to 12. So it may not be a big deal, but just look out for that one. An extender request that we got very early on with the desktop is that if they were using a style library, there are many out there, Carbon, Material, Mineral, Bootstrap, some of them fight with each other. And so putting a style library in the root of the web page can make it difficult to bring your own. So we had a request to remove Bootstrap from the desktop And again, this won't affect iframe plugins, but when we do remove Bootstrap from the desktop, it will mean that apps that were relying on the Bootstrap styles will look different. But the fix is just to add Bootstrap into your own app, which is a fairly quick process. So this is really about removing Bootstrap from the base and moving it into the plugins themselves. Next up is some desktop performance improvements. Moving to Angular 12 will already speed some things up. We're doing some other optimizations just to make sure that the number of apps that we have open don't cause any penalties. But there are still some more things that we're looking at, such as using Angular's ahead of time compilation option. That may be a breaking change. Still have to look into that one, but it's something that we're thinking of doing. Some of these items on the list were originally V2 ideas, but were actually found to be something that wouldn't break anything. So we actually put them into V1. And this next item is one such item. Switching the refer security check from off and using the cookie option same site instead. We have a security goal that is fulfilled by both technologies, but we found that the refer security check sometimes required end user configuration that people weren't aware that they needed to do. So moving to same site is just a better experience because it doesn't require any configuration. And so actually the latest versions of V1 have this feature now. Removing of loopback routing in the app server shouldn't be a breaking change for most people, but it's definitely something that you'll want to verify. What this is that due to previous limitation in the app server, if you had one service inside of the server that wanted to contact any other network service, whether it was within the same server or proxy to another server, the app server would have to contact itself before getting to the destination. So it was an extra network call. And in order to do that, it needed to reach a loopback IP. And this proved to be a problem for configuration for some people. So we found a way to do the same calls internal to the server, which should simplify configuration. And we believe it will work for most people, but you do have to check just to make sure that this feature is working for you. If it's not, there's still a flag to turn on the old behavior. Next item here is ZSS 64-bit. Currently, ZSS is a 31-bit program, which has some limitations on memory limit, but also how it uses cross-memory to talk to ZIS. So we are moving to 64-bit, and this will break plugins because they need to be compiled to also be 64-bit. This might be trivial for some people. Others might need to make some slight modifications. During this period of time, we will have 31-bit and 64-bit editions, so you can do some testing before we release V2 and see how it's working for you. The next item, we plan to get rid of server.json from the app server. You may remember in Zoe 1.8 with Cupids, we introduced instance.env as a way to configure the app server. And since then, we've been slowly moving away from server.json. It can be a source of bugs because sometimes it has equivalent information to what instance.env has, but might be out of date, causing user confusion as to which values are correct. So we want to get rid of it. However, in Zoe version 2, instance.env is also being replaced with something called zoe.yaml. And YAML and JSON being very similar formats capable of the same things. We will be making it so that everything that you used to put into server.json can now be put into zoe.yaml. So you will have equivalent capabilities, but it will all be in one file. So it will actually be easier to understand and less sources of error. So that's a breaking change for anyone who relies on server.json today. The next one, the ports of the Zoe servers are kind of in two groups. We have some in the 7.5 range and some in the 8.5 range. And so we'd like to take this opportunity to just change our defaults so that it's less confusing, less fragmented. So we would be moving the ZSS and app server ports into the 7.5xx range. The web explorers, since they're going away, those ports just won't be there anymore. Another networking change, the app server currently binds to the IP 0000, which is in contrast to the rest of the servers, which bind to whatever you put into the IP address environment variable. So in Zoe version 2, we want to also follow that default, but this can be configured to the previous behavior as the ports can be as well. So these aren't really breaking changes. These are just better defaults. Similarly, the next item, some of our environment variables don't share the same prefixes, so there's some fragmentation. We'll make aliases for the old names, but we want to migrate to some new names. So this shouldn't be this shouldn't be a breaking change, but it's something that you might want to document use of the newer variables. Finally, a change that went into, I think, the most recent release of Zoe, but will continue on into version 2, is that the desktop login page, previously, if you found the login, the message was very generic and not very helpful for troubleshooting. So we've changed this now so that whatever the server sends as a message will be displayed on the desktop, which tells you a lot more about why your desktop login failed. Perhaps there's a network error that you need to configure. So, so you may have noticed some of these are breaking changes. Some of these are configurable, and some of these are just straight up improvements. So it's really a mixed bag, but you do want to check out some of these items. Now, if we move on to the next slide, this slide applies to all of the servers, whether it's app server, ZSS, mediation layer, the web explorers, and everything that extends them. This is really about the server install and tooling changes. So here we have this theme of trying to make it easier for users to install products and extensions, and even making it easier to acquire them through something like an app store. And in order to do that, a few changes need to be made. One is that we are going to require extensions to now be using the Zoe component packaging format in our conformance program. So this format already exists in V1, but it wasn't a requirement previously. In V2, it will become a requirement for the conformance program. The reason why we're doing it is it standardizes the packaging and how Zoe understands it. It standardizes the lifecycle scripts, so we know when things are running and when they're not. And with all the standardization, we can start to build better tools on top of it to simplify behavior to the end user. So the next item is in line with simplification. We want to deprecate all of the tools that used to be used directly, but you should instead be using the component packaging and tooling. So some of these internal scripts may still be around. What I'm really saying here is don't rely on them in the future. Rely instead on the component tooling. The component tooling may be calling these internal scripting, but we need to reserve the right to change these in order to make the end user experience better. And so we're going to use the component interface as the thing that we're keeping stable in the future. When we have all of the standardization and stability, we can build a CLI on top of it. This may not be the Zoe CLI that we talk about so much, but really this is a CLI on the server side for the purpose of managing Zoe servers and products and extensions that run on top of them. So this might be able to do things like tell you the status of Zoe, or tell you what plugins you have, or help you to install a plugin. And on top of that, we want to build an app store. So using that CLI and the standardization of component packaging, we're going to combine cloud and on-prem package management to allow admins to be able to search for, install, remove, and upgrade extensions. This really, both the CLI and the App Store it shouldn't really matter to extenders because they're more end user facing. But the one catch here is that when we do have a package manager, everything needs to have unique IDs so that two products don't overlap with each other. So we may need a reservation system to match with the conformance program. I think we'll be talking about that more in the future. Two more deprecations. I talked about instance.env going away in favor of zoe.yaml. Zoe.yaml already exists in Zoe V1, so you can take a look at it today if you're interested in knowing like how is this going to affect you. But the other deprecation here is the ZWE SV STC. That's the STC that we use to start the Zoe servers today. We have an alternative already in version 1, SLSTC, and that is what we call the Zoe Launcher. We created it a few releases ago as a replacement because it does tasks that we need for high availability. So since we have this replacement, we want to deprecate the old one. And this really shouldn't impact extensions because these tasks are the things that start the extensions. So the extensions are still going to be started either way. But it does change the documentation a little bit. So the way in which you get Zoe installed and running is going to be a little bit different, but it should be more consistent this way. Now, some of these things that we talked about, I mentioned, they're already in version 1. Some of these things are still to come, and we might not even have a tech preview download for them just yet. But basically, the timelines and the features and what we need to break in order to continue to maintain, these decisions are all made based on feedback that we get from all of you. So if you have questions or concerns or ideas, you can always contact us via the community channels. But I think we started off this presentation by talking about the role of the ZAC. So the ZAC is another great place to sort of get involved and share your opinions on all of this. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so let's wrap it up with new to you, upcoming events and ongoing commitments, as we always do, right? Just trying to bring attention to some of the items that we introduced over the past 3 months. Although same disclaimer as last time, this is not comprehensive. Just highlights that we feel are worth mentioning for sure. So last time we did mention that we introduced Zoe release blogs to complement the Zoe releases. We are introducing more blogs at the Open Mainframe Project, .org/news/blog. Peter's blog on ZAC is highlighted here. In addition, we also mentioned last time that the Zoe doc site was redesigned. Just want to reinforce that again this time. There's a new revamped site layout and homepage. We're sharing it here. That's what it looks like now. There's a light and dark theme. There's estimated reading time on the pages. There's an ability to quick share to social platforms, to zoom in and out of images, etc. So if you haven't visited Zoe Docs, please consider doing that now. And as always, give us your feedback. So new to us is your feedback back to us. I guess that's repetitive, but yeah, we launched the semi-annual Zoe consumer feedback survey. It is now open. We launched it on Friday. Our first survey of 2021 was launched back in January, and this is our second. And we would very much appreciate it if you took some time to complete the survey. If you go through the whole thing, it's probably going to run you about 20 minutes, but we do feel as though it will give you insight into where we're headed, some of the questions we have for all of you, and again, an opportunity for you all to give us feedback. So please go ahead and consider taking that survey. If you don't have the link, forget the link, not sure of the link, zoe.org, announcements right at the top of that landing page will also have the link. Upcoming events. So if you're interested in understanding what we have planned specifically beyond what Peter had presented earlier and what some of the squad leads had presented coming with V2, our PI planning is happening next week. We highly recommend that you try to attend at least the opening session where the squads give an overview of what they're planning. In addition, we have a higher level look from the ZAC as well as the TSC starting on Monday. The schedule is available at zoe.org as well, and it will run from Monday through Wednesday. We also have our demo schedules, or what we call our, I think, system demos that we plan every time we release Zoe. We have an upcoming release 1.25 with a system demo planned for early November, and then tentative dates for 1.26, 1.27, or December 20th, January 31st. Everyone's welcome to attend those system demos. They are placed on the Zoe calendar. Again, you can get to the calendar starting at zoe.org, click on the community, the top of the page, the landing page there, and then just go ahead and scroll down until you see the calendar, and we have all of the dates and links to the meetings there. For upcoming conference sessions where you may be able to learn more about Zoe and how consumers are leveraging Zoe, we have GSE UK GuideShare Europe. That is happening on November 2nd through the 11th. We have several Zoe speakers there, including Joe Winchester and Jakob Baller from the TSC. Please go ahead and check out those sessions. We also have iDoug, virtual iDoug coming up. That's a DB2 technical conference on December 6th through 10th. There may be additional Zoe sessions, but the one I was able to locate is obviously focused on DB2 in the world of enterprise DevOps. Please go ahead and check those out. If you're interested in replaying this webinar or prior webinars or any of the other events that have happened or will happen, again, zoe.org, page down that landing page, you'll see something similar to what we're showing here. And as we mentioned at the top of the hour, this webinar will be available for replay on the YouTube channel. Easiest way to locate it is search on Zoe Quarterly, and you should be able to find all of our quarterly webinars there. As always, we're continuing to contribute to medium.com. We have materials there. Mike Bauer pointed out some. Peter pointed out a couple of blogs as well related to the support provider program. We have use case centric materials at Modern Mainframe. We have Zoe specific materials at medium.com/Zoe. If you're interested in contacting any of us, zoe.org, click on community. You'll find our Slack channels when our meetings are scheduled, our GitHub repos, and always, if you want to interact with us directly, someone is out on the Slack channel at some point all of the time. So please don't hesitate to use those Slack channels. Onboarding is a great place to start. If you have a general Zoe question, Zoe user is also a great place to start as well. And then as always, we'd like to give you insights into when we're going to be meeting again. Our plan right now is to have our next quarterly webinar in January, tentatively scheduled January 19th, same time. We'd like to be able to share some Zoe survey results and of course, probably more focus on V2, seeing that we'll probably be maybe just a month away of introducing that. And we certainly welcome your suggestions for topics. With that, I think that closes us out for another quarter. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll see you next time. Be well.